Welcome to the HMO Success Podcast. I'm your host, Wendy Whitaker-Large, and I'm here to help you create a profitable HMO portfolio. Whether you're a brand new investor or you've been at it for a number of years, my podcast is here to help you make the most from your business, whether that is starting up, scaling, or systemizing. Please hit the subscribe button to make sure you never miss an episode. And if you've got an awe-inspiring project, an inspirational investing story, or a unique approach to HMOs, I'd love to hear from you. Great to have you on the podcast. Lovely to welcome you to the HMO Success Podcast. My name is Wendy Whitaker-Large. I'm your host, and I'm really pleased that this podcast is getting to areas that other podcasts do not reach. One of those places that we have reached is the far-flung destination, wonderful country on the other side of the world, Australia. And today I'm so pleased to be joined by a fantastic guest from Down Under, although not originally from Down Under. And we're going to talk a little bit about his story and how he ended up in Australia. He is an HMO investor. He left the UK and moved to Australia in 2010, started investing in 2014. And 4 years later, he left his full-time employment, having got enough cash flow from property to be able to do that. Very, very exciting. He's worked with over 200 investors to help provide HMOs and also special disability accommodation in Western Australia. He's got a team of 16 people, so a big team to manage. And his target, his goal, is to deliver 10,000 rooms to the market by 2031. What a fantastic goal that is. His name is Neil Gibb. And this morning, I'm really pleased to have you here on the podcast, Neil. Good morning.
Thank you, Wendy. It give me goosebumps hearing you read that bio back to me.
Of course, where you are, it's probably the afternoon, isn't it? Or maybe early evening even.
Yeah. It's almost home time. It's 4:30 in the afternoon here, so there's a 7-hour time difference at the minute.
Listening to you, Neil, I can tell that you haven't fully taken on board everything Australian. Your accent gives the game away. So tell me a little bit about your background, where you were born and brought up, and what sort of led to you moving over to Australia.
Yes, I was born in Middlesbrough in the northeast of England. And when I'm on podcasts in Australia, I need to explain what Middlesbrough is like because no one knows where it is or what it's like. But I'm guessing a lot of your listeners will know that it's in the northeast of England. It's just a hard-working industrial town, and there's just a lot of work harder, not smarter, that goes on up there. So when I left the country in 2010, I came just to find work. I was an electrician, so I moved over to Perth, turned up with basically a bag of clothes, my passport, and my bank card, and started applying for work and got a job within 2 weeks of landing in the country. So I just fell straight into work, didn't get to do any of the touristy stuff. Got into work, made a heap of good friends, and then I had to transfer my electrical skills from English to the Australian equivalent. That took me about 10, 11 months to do so. And then as soon as I did that, I worked in Perth for probably another 12 months. And then the big thing in Australia is doing a thing called fly in, fly out, which is because Australia is such a big place, you essentially live in one of the capital cities, be it Perth, Sydney, Brisbane, or Melbourne, for instance. And then you generally fly to remote destinations where there's mining plants being built or oil and gas plants being built. So I got pulled into that in a pretty early stage, and the money was probably the main thing that I went to do it for. At the time, I was single, so I didn't have anybody back in Perth to worry about. So I just pleased myself, and life was good.
Yes, amazing. And did you settle into the Australian way of life quite quickly and quite easily, or did you find there was a bit of a culture shock when you arrived?
Oh, no. Australia, when I first moved here, I lived with 3 other guys from Middlesbrough. So it was like being in Middlesbrough just with sunshine.
That sounds good to me.
But yeah, the opportunities when I got here as well. I think England at the time, if I remember rightly, 2010 was still struggling after the GFC. But Western Australia in particular was booming off the back of a mining boom. So they were exporting a lot of iron ore to places like China and India. So Western Australia was booming. I literally, like I say, I fell into work within 2 weeks, and every job I applied for after that, I got.
Amazing. And presumably that was the case for your friends as well.
Yes, yeah. Not all of them have stayed in Australia. Some of them have moved on. But for me, it just felt like it felt like home within 2 or 3 weeks. Didn't miss Middlesbrough one bit. I missed the people there, but I didn't miss Middlesbrough in general. And yeah, since 2010, this has been home for me and will be for the rest of my life, no doubt.
In 2014, you took a slightly different turn. What happened, and what caused that investment beginning? What was it that was the catalyst for you starting to invest?
Yeah. So back in the UK, when I was leaving school at 16-year-old, my mum's husband, who she remarried, a guy called Peter Mitchell. At 16, I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. And Mitch said to me, become an electrician, get a trade. There's always tradesmen wanted all over the world. And he said to me, go basically work anywhere in the world and earn as much money as you can. So that subconsciously became a goal of mine. And when I came to Australia, like I said, I fell into work. I ended up setting another goal of wanting to work offshore in Australia, because that was the highest paying job you could get in the world, I think, as an electrician. The money was incredible. So I subconsciously set that goal, and then I did that in 2013, I think. Back into 2013, start of 2014. And I remember getting out there on that platform, and this was everything I'd ever dreamed of since I was 16-year-old, just getting to this country and working offshore. And I remember standing on this platform and just feeling totally unfulfilled and thinking to myself, is this it? Is this everything I've ever dreamed for? And I'm stood there in a pair of greasy overalls. Yes, the money was good, but it doesn't drop in your bank account as fast as you'd like it to. So I instantly started thinking, what next? And I had friends back in the UK that were pretty successful property investors. I had a guy, one of my best friends, had like 20 odd properties. And I was the guy that used to go around that fixed all the mistakes up when tenants damaged properties for him. So I was fitting kitchens, I was doing all the electrical work. My stepdad, who got me into being an electrician, he was a plumber. So between me and him, we used to help them with all the plumbing work. So they always used me to keep their portfolios humming nicely, but no one ever showed me how to actually create a portfolio and make it profitable, how to monetize real estate in general. So I started looking into courses, and the reason I started looking at the courses is because the guy I lived with in Western Australia, who was also from Middlesbrough, a guy called David Lamb. Dave had about 4 or 5 properties at the time when we started living together. And just one night he said to me, I'm going to a seminar tonight, mate. Would you like to come with me? And on that stage was there was a guy from a company called Brick by Brick, and I think it was tied in with Robert Kiyosaki somehow. And the guy actually gave us the book, Think and Grow Rich, not Think and Grow Rich, Rich Dad Poor Dad. And then he stood on stage and he proceeded to tell us like how he built this portfolio, how it generates cash flow for him. And I was just blown away. No one had ever told me this before, yet I was surrounded by people in the UK that were property investors, but no one ever showed me or explained to me how to do a feasibility in a property to make sure it's cash flow positive, how to price up a renovation correctly. So if you buy at this price and you spent this much on it, factor in your holding costs, stamp duty, etc., selling costs. And here was this guy on stage explaining everything to me. So it's kind of like someone just opened the door and said, everything you thought you knew, check this out. And as exciting as it was, I instantly felt that I was starting at the bottom again. That makes sense. Because I didn't know anything about it. So I over the next, since 2014, I just joined up to 2 or 3 different courses, learned the teachings in them courses, implemented the teaching in them courses, made some good money, and then reinvested some of that money back into more courses. And I actually went to a course by a guy who's teaching people how to do HMOs, or what they call them rooming houses in Australia. So he was teaching people how to set up rooming houses, but set them up with full insurance in place, with full council approvals in place, and showing them how to actually vet them and make sure that they be cash flow positive on the back end. Because in Australia, we have this weird thing called negative gearing, where your portfolio loses money. You can actually claim that loss back as a tax deduction from the government, which is just bizarre. Anyway, this guy was teaching people how to set up rooming houses and HMOs and boarding houses, lodging houses, etc. And my wife and I joined that course, and we again followed the steps in the course. Did our first one, did our second one, did our third one. And the guy tapped us on the shoulder and said, "I've been watching you guys since 2014 when you joined the first course that you ever joined. And you're doing some great things over there in Western Australia. And I'd love you to be part of my team and help my students set up HMOs in Western Australia." So we did that. And then we'd only done 3 properties. This guy was flying us around Australia, and we were standing on stage telling everyone about the success we'd had with HMOs.
Wow.
Real imposter syndrome right there, right then. So, it's when I look back at it then, I was thinking, God, how did we even manage to keep a straight face when we were on stage talking about stuff like that?
So it's been quite a fast journey. Certainly the way that you speak, Neil, although we're going back kind of 9 years, but from 2014, things clearly kind of took off pretty quickly. But the key thing, it seems, was that you built your portfolio, you built your investing, your property investment portfolio on education, that you started by educating yourself, didn't you? And it sounds like, you like you say, you had to almost go back to the beginning. You felt that you were starting on the bottom rung of the ladder again. You were retraining yourself. You're learning all about property. And clearly, learning about property in Australia or any foreign country is going to be different to investing in the UK, for example. We have specific rules and regulations and laws and tax laws and so on. And of course, Australia will have its own tax laws. As you say, negative gearing is one of the ones that is used in Australia to encourage people to invest without taking a hit on their cash flow loss, because generally it's cash flow negative, isn't it? Because of the the yields are not what you would get in the UK. And roomy houses. Oh, that sounds a very sweet name for an HMO. I think I prefer it to HMO, which sounds very sort of formal, doesn't it? A 3-letter acronym that nobody understands. So roomy house. That's a nice title to give it. Now, when you started, you were based in Western Australia, based in Perth. What did you do to understand the market? How did you know that there was a market for roomy houses?
Well, we didn't. So as part of the education course that we went into, the guy... So on the East Coast, for instance, in the likes of Brisbane, New South Wales, Sydney and Victoria, they had policy in place because people have been doing these things en masse. So they've got different policies over on the East Coast, and sometimes the West and the East, they feel like 2 different countries because they're literally 5 hours apart on a flight. That's how big the country is. It's huge. So in the West, what we had to do is, when my wife and I joined this course, we actually did a little bit of research to find out if anyone was doing them, and we couldn't find anybody apart from student accommodation, literally surrounding universities. And the property that we wanted to test this on was our house, our principal place of residence. So what we did is we put some test ads online to pretend that the property was actually converted, and we just conversed with people as they reached out and asked questions about the property. And when we felt there was enough interest to actually fill that property, then what we did is we actually took out the furniture that we wanted. We actually put some furniture in the garage just in case it didn't work. We left furniture in the garage because we thought, look, we'll give it 3 or 4 weeks. If we can't fill the house, we'll just move back into it. It's as simple as that. And we actually moved in with a mother-in-law whilst we fill this property. So
really, so you used your own house as a sort of test HMO to see if you could fill it. That's great. I love it.
And at the time, the vacancy rate in Western Australia was 7%. So there was something like 17 to 18,000 vacant houses on the market, which is a lot. The real estate of Western Australia says that a balanced market is between 8 to 10,000 properties, right now we've got under 2,000 houses available, so the market's in dire straits right now. But back then it was 7%, so there was lots of vacant properties kicking around back then. Investors were struggling big time, and they were dropping the rents every single week. So it was a bit of a gamble for us to actually convert this property, because we thought, well, if there's 2 houses down the road that haven't rented out in 6 months, why is this going to work? But we filled all 5 rooms within 3 weeks. And we filled all 5 rooms for nearly 2.5 times what the houses down the road were on the market for, and hadn't rented out in 6 months' time. So that's when we knew we were onto something.
Presumably your model is similar to the one we have over here, which is all-inclusive bills. So everything is included in the rent.
Correct, yeah. We did try and do it individually, but it just got too hard to manage. So we just put an extra $25 per person per week on top of their rent. And it just seems to work really well.
And
I prefer it as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think all-inclusive is the way to go. That's what most people want, because they want it to be simple, don't they? They want to be able to move in, live there, and not worry about any extra costs, so they can budget, and it's easier for them. What about rules and regulations? Because, back here in the UK, we every couple of years, the government thinks they're not doing enough and they need to put in more rules and regulations, and the list grows and grows and grows. What's it like where you are, though, Neil?
So going back to when I said earlier that on the East Coast, they've had policy in place for quite a long time now. Brisbane's got the rooming house policy. Victoria's got the rooming house policy. And New South Wales, Sydney, they had this really cool term called the new generation boarding house. And they said that if you bring a 4-bedroom property to the market and it fits certain criteria, close to a bus stop, close to transport, close to all these different things, the New South Wales government actually give you a $2,500 rebate for every room you brought to the market per year for the first 5 years.
Wow. I think I'll go to Sydney.
Yeah, they've stopped it now. They've stopped it now. Back in 2015, that's what they had in place. Now, again, Western Australia, saying it feels like a different country. Western Australia's got no policy in place until you have over 6 people living in a property that are unrelated.
Oh, okay, interesting. Yeah. Yes, right.
So
that is interesting.
You can have up to 6 unrelated people living in a dwelling without the need to change the classification, without the need to change the fire safety of the property, without the need to register it with council. You can just put 6 people in there, no problem.
So similar to our policy, but ours is obviously 4. You once you get to 5, you need to have a license, but up to 4, you can run it as an unlicensed HMO. And in some areas, that's very, very light touch. In others, there's still a little bit of regulation that's needed, depending on where you are. Okay.
Yeah. And that's what the student accommodation that we seen was ran like. They just put real basic furniture in there, rented it out to 6 people. Some people might have squeezed 7 or 8 in there. You know what they're like with student accommodation. But my wife and I said that if we were going to do this, we were going to bring a higher standard of accommodation to the market, because we knew there was good money to be made in it, but we also knew that people deserve quality accommodation, not just any housing. We didn't want to be classed as slumlords, because there was a stigma around this style of accommodation as well, and there still is. And we're trying our best to change people's perception of the way that people will live in the future and are living now. But the way we set our properties up, we set them up as if they are an actual registered HMO, registered rooming house. So we put smoke alarms in every bedroom, and they're all interconnected. So if one goes off, they all go off. We've got emergency lighting that comes on. So if the smoke alarms come on, the lights come on, so people can see how to evacuate the property. And we put a single lever, always free to exit handle on the front door, so that people can always evacuate in the event of a fire. Yes,
and so those are, again, similar kind of standards, quality standards to the ones we'd have in the UK. Those are similar. I always think there's a little bit of a debate in my own mind. While we want to keep people safe and you want them to be secure in their properties, there's always a problem with increased regulation, which is that you start to institutionalize the property a little bit. It sometimes feels a little bit like a hostel or a formalized institution, not a home, because in our own home we don't have interlinked smoke detectors, and actually we do have a thumb turn screw on our front door to get out quickly, but that's just because people were forgetting to lock the front door, so we put that on there for sort of security reasons. But I do, when I go into bigger HMOs and I see all these rules and regulations being implemented, it sometimes feels like it's not a home. And the fact is, of course, we're renting to adults, and you would hope that people would take some responsibility for their living and their lifestyle while they're in a shared home. It's a difficult debate. It's a hard one debate, and I agree with you about standards. We want to be leading the way when it comes to standards and setting the standards. But I do believe in the free market, and I do believe that lower quality accommodation also serves a purpose because it's cheaper. And price is a very, very good determinant of quality. Well, not always, but it can be. I think in housing it generally seems to reflect, because we do have a relatively free market. But anyway, I think that, although some people might debate that, but I think in Australia you have a much freer market than we do in the UK. My experience is that Australia is still far less regulated than the UK overall. Is that your experience?
When you live here, it certainly doesn't feel like that. But after the conversation that we had last week, maybe it's not. But like I say, when you're in it day in day out, it does feel like it's regulated quite heavily. But I also feel that the regulations that are in place now and the laws and everything makes it such a great place to live that you can live with it. And we had the conversation the other week as well. You said it feels such a laid back place, such a family oriented place. And that drives some people up the walls. But I think it's a great place to live. It's got such an outdoor lifestyle. It's right now it's attracting thousands and thousands of people to the country every single week, which is why we've got the housing crisis that we've got right now. The government literally opened the doors and just said we need more skilled migrants to enter the country. And I think at last check they'd let 150,000 in since COVID finished. And then they're planning to treble that over the next 2 years.
Neil, the UK last year alone let in 500,000 migrants. Mm. So 3 and a bit times what Australia has let in since COVID. That's the difference. Anyway, let's not get into too big a political debate. That's for another podcast.
I think the difference here as well, Wendy, is these are skilled migrants. So Australia don't just open the doors and let anybody in. They've got strict criteria. If you fill X, Y, and Z, if you're a carpenter, if you're an electrician, if you're a plumber, come on in, we need you. It's as simple as that.
Now, tell us a little bit about your tenants, because that interests me as well. You mentioned that there were already student roomy houses, and that's been sort of part and parcel of presumably student accommodation for quite some time. These houses, you're not housing students, are you?
Correct. So when we did our first sort of due diligence on the market, we noticed all of the student accommodation, real low end, really badly managed by the property managers, because they would have, 1,000, 2,000 standard, as you call them, standard lets. We just call them investment properties. So they'd have a standard investment property to rent out. And then they'd have like 10 HMOs or 10 student accommodation properties. And they were just they were kind of forgotten about, and they weren't given the attention and care that they needed. So what we started doing is when we did our first property, it was in the suburbs. And that was another reason that we didn't think it would work. But then when we started getting the inquiries from the people, we ended up with a van driver who was in his early 50s, been in the country for 4 years, had a visa, just couldn't find any accommodation that he could afford himself, and then furnish himself, and then pay all the bills himself, and also pay a large bond as well, because you have to pay 4 weeks bond over here. So the cost to get into an investment or rental property are quite high. So we charge 2 weeks rent as a bond and 2 weeks rent up front. And our prices are generally a third of what it would cost to rent a full property in that same suburb. We also we ended up with a couple rented one of the rooms from us, and the lady, she was a geotechnical engineer. She worked for BHP, and she used to do fly in, fly out as well. And her husband was also an engineer, but he couldn't find any work at the time, so he was working in the casino as just working in hospitality. So between them, their household income of just them two people was incredible, because she was earning close to $200,000 a year. So they didn't need to rent these rooms, but they love the fact that while she's away, he's there. He's got people around him. The house is fully furnished. All the bills are included. So they ended up staying in that property for 3 years, and then they actually went out and bought their own property themselves.
That's incredible. That's amazing. And I think that's true here as well, that actually once people get a grip of the concept, once they understand that high quality HMOs can really be a benefit to your own lifestyle, that it doesn't mean that you're going to be living in cramped accommodation that's poorly ventilated with few amenities, which is, I think, how most people perhaps think of them. But actually, like you provided, high quality, spacious rooms, plenty of room for a couple to, have their own space, but also, as you say, the social aspect of living with other tenants, so that when she's away, he's there. And he's got some company around him. I think this becomes a lifestyle choice for people, and it allows them, because it's cheaper than renting a single family home, it allows them to save up a deposit for a property, to perhaps get their own finances in order, so that they can then decide whether they are ready to buy their own property and become a property owner themselves, which is a very, very good thing.
Yeah. We find, as you said there, people either use it as a platform to establish themselves and then move on, or some people find it a default way of living. And unfortunately, that is how they will live for the rest of their lives. But they're also fortunate that we brought a level of accommodation to the market that they can afford, but is also quality and safe and affordable.
Since that heady beginning, when you moved out of your own property to test the concept, which I think is amazing and very brave, what happened? Because you've now grown to be a pretty big operation. So tell us about the numbers, Neil, and how this has happened.
Yeah, so when we first started, I think we got to property number 5, and my wife and I were still managing our property as our own. But we were still working full time as well. I was working in the oil and gas industry, so I had a pretty good income. My wife was project director for a marketing company, so she had a really good income. So what we didn't want to do is create our jobs to manage 5 properties. So we set up a property management business, and we hired someone to manage our properties for us. Because when we were approaching local property managers to manage the properties that we'd converted into HMOs, no one would manage them the way that we wanted them managing. So what they wanted to do was put everybody on the same lease as co-tenants. And that way everybody would contribute to the bond, everyone would contribute to the rent, and then everybody would take care of their own bills. And we just thought that would be an absolute schmozzle from the start. And it wouldn't get us the yields that we wanted to get from these properties as well. So in the end, we ended up self-managing our own properties and setting our own bespoke agreements up, which we got crafted by a solicitor. We still use them agreements to this day. They've been tested a few times in court, and it's good to say that they've stood the test.
Great.
Yep.
That's very, very good. Contract law. Yeah. Excellent.
Yeah. So once we got that property management business set up, because of the groups, the education groups that we joined, all of them had Facebook groups. And at the time, I didn't realize it, but I was slowly starting to build this personal brand, because I was dropping renovations in there that we were doing. I was dropping HMOs in there that we were converting and creating cash flow from. I told people when we set up the property management business, then we got to property number 6. And I said to my mentor, he said to me, "Oh, have you got any problems at the minute?" I said, I just don't feel I'm going fast enough. And he said, kind of just had a word in my ear and said, "Mate, you've got 6 properties, you've set up a property management business. This has all happened in 2.5 years." I said, I know. I said, I just feel really comfortable at the minute. I've got my income from the oil and gas industry, and I've also got this income from my portfolio, which is $20,000 a year less than my full salary. I said, I think the best thing that could happen for me is, I could get sacked, just lose my job. And then 3 days later, I got the tap on the shoulder at work.
Amazing.
The contractor.
Be careful what you wish for.
Through, they lost the contract, and I went back home, told my wife, and I said, "Well, this is it. This is us going full time into property." And I packaged it up a different way for social media. I told everyone that I quit my job because I'd replaced my income. Kind of true, but
well, you decided to take it, didn't you? You made redundant. Yeah. You took the redundancy, and you decided that you were quitting, and there was a decision in that ultimately. So I don't think it was too much of a sort of variation from the truth.
When I put that onto social media, the phone started ringing. People started asking me to help me with their properties. People from over east in Sydney that were buying properties in Perth. I said, I've just bought this property. Can you help me convert it into a HMO? Before you know it, we had our 6. We'd done another 4. We had 10 in the property management business. Then we had 20. Then we had 30. Right now we're on HMO. I think we're on 110 or 111 that we've just delivered. And we've housed over 650 people in safe, clean, quality accommodation in Western Australia. But there's a guy in the UK, and this is how I actually found you, Wendy. I didn't tell you this. I'm a big fan of Rob Noah.
Yes.
Big fan of Rob.
He's a friend of mine. I know Rob pretty well.
Never done any of his courses. But what I did is listen to his podcast from start to finish, and I consumed all of his content, and everything he said I did. And I've got incredible results from just actually doing that. So Rob said, post more content. Where do I start? Everything he said I basically did.
Leverage your time, use other people's skills. Yeah.
Life Leverage, took everything from Life Leverage.
Yeah, that's an excellent book. I love that book.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it just went from there. I think when we got to 20 properties, if I remember rightly, I said to my wife, I think we've got a business model here. I think we should start taking this seriously. And it all of a sudden went from a hobby to a machine that needed feeding constantly. And I think that's when I started listening to Rob's stuff. And what I did 2 years ago now, probably 2.5 years ago, there was a guy that I reached out to because we had all this work going on in the pipeline. We were set up a buyers agency to help people find properties that were on the market that we can convert to HMOs. And then we'd actually have a project manager that project managed the renovation. And then we had a furniture pack team, and then we had our property management team. And then people started asking me if I could help them with new builds. So we set up a new build arm. So we started buying vacant blocks of land, custom designing 6-bedroom HMOs, all with en suites, project manage the construction, put the furniture in, property management as well. But it got to the point where I was spinning all these plates, and I was starting to drop them. And there was a guy in Perth who he was he had a very successful building company. He'd been developing in Perth for close to 30 years now. And in 2016, after the Perth market took a heavy dip, he ended up going bankrupt, and his building company hit the wall. And he just seen my content on social media one day, and he reached out to me and he said, "Look, I love what you're doing." He took me out for a coffee, and he explained to me like how his company went south. And he just said to me, "If you need any help with anything, just reach out to me." He goes, I'm looking to get back into something. And I reached back out to him and I said, "Look, I'm really struggling right now. My business is going crazy and it's out of control. I need help." And he said, "Oh, how's it going to look?" So I kind of said to him, "I think I've got the sales and marketing side worked out, and I enjoy running the business." I said, "But I need some help delivering." And this guy's, almost 30 years experience in the construction development game, and we agreed to partner up. And I think that was probably one of the best things I've done in business so far, because it allowed me to, although I'm concerned about what happens on site, but it means I don't have to worry about it, because I've got someone with so much skill and knowledge and expertise that just knows it inside out. But at his peak as well, he also had close to 90 people working for him. So all the things that happen inside the business now, he's like, "Oh yeah, well, when this happened before, this is what I did, or this is what you need to do, or this is what you need to look out for. So not only have I got a business partner that is just an incredible human being, he's like a full-time mentor within the business that can guide me through all of these things that have happened, but also are going to happen. And because he's been there and done that, and at one point he was building close to 300 houses a year, right now we've got 109 HMOs and disability accommodation in our pipeline.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, amazing.
So the company is about to almost double in size with the work that we've got in the pipeline right now.
Now, in terms of, I think that sounds, amazing to have almost stumbled across him and found him to, that you've created this partnership. And it reminds me of the E-Myth by Michael Gerber, because he very much talks about how to grow and how to scale your business, and that you need, when you start as an entrepreneur, you start doing everything. You start by doing everything, and you find the properties, you refurb the properties, or you might have a builder in to do that, but you might even have separate trades that you're coordinating. You find the tenants, you do the advertising, the marketing, you're doing everything, you're doing the viewings, etc., unless you have a good agent that can do those for you. But like you, that's how I started. In order to grow, though, you've obviously got to develop a role, you've got to carve out your own niche and find out what you're good at. What is it, do you think, that you bring to the business, Neil, that, now that you've got this team around you, what is it that you bring, and what are the skills, do you think, that other people can look to you to think, yeah, I've got to develop those skills for me to grow my business as big as Neil's?
Great question. I think because, like you say, in the early days, you're doing everything yourself. So you've got experience in every single department in the business. So you understand what everybody's roles are. And I think as the business has grown, their roles have changed as well. And what I've managed to do is slowly replace inexperience with experienced people as well. So I look outside at the team now, and I'm kind of blown away with the experience that I've got in the office, because I've just got this real pool of talented people, which 5 years ago I would never have thought I would have been able to attract. And now there they are, working for us, helping us achieve this mission of trying to deliver 10,000 rooms by 2031. So I think right now what I bring to the team is leadership and nothing else, because the people that are put in them seats are all better at doing what they do than I am. And like Rob says, you got to let go to grow, haven't you? So I think what I have been really good at is setting systems in place, putting someone in that seat, and then just letting them do what they need to do.
Well, that's incredibly valuable. So you're not a micromanager, but yet you probably understand the remit of that role. But as you say, putting somebody in who's better, what you really want is for them to come to you and say, Neil, I know this is the way that you've sort of done it up till now, but can I suggest an alternative approach that I think is going to give us access to this potential market, or this potential approach, or is going to make us more efficient? Those are the people you want in your team, don't you?
Absolutely. And I've spent a lot on education and coaching and mentorship. And I went to a mastermind in Perth, because a lot of them are on the East Coast as well. So it's really tricky being in Perth, because sometimes you feel really isolated being away from the big cities like Melbourne and Sydney. But I went to a mastermind in Perth, and the guy who ran the mastermind, every time you go to his mastermind, he gives you a little gift. And inside the gift was the book Scaling Up by Vern Harnish.
Right.
And he actually had he Zoomed a lady in called Anna Samios, who did a 90-minute presentation for us. And scaling up has probably been the basis of how I run that business right now. So we have our off-site yearly meeting where I bring all of the team with me. We spend the full day going through the purpose, the vision, the mission, the values of the business, making sure everybody's still aligned with them. We've got our 10,000 room goal broken down into a 5-year goal, into a 3-year goal, into a 1-year goal, and a 90-day goal. And then every 90 days, we come back and review our goals from the annual planning day.
Amazing.
And in them planning days, I say to the team, like, what do we need to improve on? So we'll do strengths, weaknesses, and threats. We'll do all that. We'll do what are we doing well? What can we What can we keep doing? What can we start doing? Keep, start, stop doing. So I get input from the team because they're the ones that are out there getting frustrated day in, day out. They're the ones in the trenches making sure all the work's getting done. So I'm asking them firsthand, what do you think we need to do to improve as a team? What do you need from me for us to reach 10,000 rooms as a team? And yeah, they give me all the problems that we're up against. We turn them into goals. We assign each one of them goals to somebody on the team, and they've got 90 days to solve that goal.
Great. I love that kind of approach. I think it's really, really powerful, because I think that then everybody is aligned in their purpose, but they have variety in their role. And that's so important, isn't it, to have a team with you where you've got a variety of personalities, approaches. In our team, we've got some people who are quite cautious and risk averse, very good at detail. Then we've got other people who are big picture thinkers, visionaries, want to go out and kind of, convert the whole world. And you need both. And I think one of the attitudes of a leader is to keep those people aligned to the business vision, and not to let some of those discrepancies or differences to pull apart, but actually to work together for the strength of the team. Actually, when we were in Australia earlier this year, it was while the Women's World Cup was going on, and we were lucky enough to get tickets to one of the games when England was playing Nigeria in Brisbane, which was the most phenomenal evening of my life. Absolutely tremendous match. Of course, we won it on penalties, so it was very, very tight. Very, very competitive. And what was great about that whole tournament was watching the way that the England women's team, because we were obviously supporting England, how they worked together as a team, and how Selena Wiegman, I think that's how you pronounce her surname, the manager, knew the strengths and weaknesses of all the different players and was able to put them in the right positions and play them well, and understand what formation was needed in order to get the best result. And there was a sense of discipline actually as the players played as well. You could see they had a game plan. You could see they had an understanding of when to move forward, when to stand back, when to support Mary in goal, when to do what they were supposed to do. And there was the odd moment where some of them didn't play according to that game plan, and you would see a gap occur. And this was in some of the later games, and boom, a goal is scored, and everyone's sort of wringing their hands. Why did that happen? Well, it's because we didn't stick to the game plan as a team. So I do think that's really vital. I think one of my mentors once said to me, you're not a CEO, you're a CFO, you're a chief reminder officer. You have to remind the team, you have to remind the business, you have to remind your employees, whoever you have working for you, what it is we're doing, why we're doing it, where we're going, how we're going to get there. And you have to keep reminding people, because they do forget and they go off on different tangents. Now, another thing I wanted to ask you about, Neil, was in terms of your business model, because you clearly work with a number of investors. So what is it that you offer to those investors, and what kind of returns can they get by working with you?
Yeah, so in the early days, we used to, because the vacancy rate was 7%, we had a lot of people bringing vacant properties to us, which we converted. So we started off with that very standard conversion piece. Then we set up the buyer's agency. So I've still got a buyer's agent that works for me now. He goes out and finds the properties that can be converted, and we provide a feasibility for the client to say, if you purchase this property, the conversion looks like this, and we'll show them the before and after for the floor plan. Then the feasibility looks like this, so we can give them purchase price, renovation cost, room rate, and cash flow before they even put an offer in on the property. And then we can also work with people who want to do new builds. Now, I believe the opportunity right now in Western Australia is in the new build space, because there's not a lot of properties on the market. At home opens right now, there's between 30 and 50 people queuing up to view a property that's on the market for sale. And I've seen some properties only in the last 2 weeks sell for $80,000 to $100,000 more than they were actually listed for.
So the market has completely turned around then, hasn't it? From being, having lots of vacancies and lots of properties available, it's absolutely flipped, hasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it sure has.
And what do you put that down to? Because surely 150,000 immigrants, that's, many of them will be going to other cities, not just Perth. So why has it changed so rapidly and so dramatically?
So Perth, historically, it's been called a boom and bust town because we've got this mining industry which kind of feeds Western Australia quite heavily, or it has done in the past. I believe this is going to change over the next, I believe it's changing now, because what happened in 2009, the market took off strongly, very strongly. And I think by 2012, our median house price was something like $20,000 less than Sydney. And then the mining, we had a lot of construction going on in the mining industry there. So there was Chevron, there was Impex, there was Woodside, there was Shell. They were all building huge, massive projects up in the Northwest Shelf there. And there was probably 150,000 people required just for them projects alone. So a lot of people moved to the country. There was, again, a lot of demand for housing that pushed the market up. Once them construction projects stopped, the market started to drop. And that's when my business partner actually went bust, because the market went south. A lot of foreign investors pulled out of the pre-sales on the properties that he was building. And that's how he basically violated his LVR with the bank, and they ended up closing on all of his loans. So what happened is the market went down because basically a lot of people left Perth. They all went back to the home countries, or they moved over east. And we ended up with this oversupply of properties on the market for quite a while. And slowly but surely, Sydney and Melbourne were going absolutely gangbusters over on the east. But everybody was looking on the east coast for investment opportunities because Perth was a boom and bust town. But slowly, the oversupply started getting gobbled up, and slower and slower and slower. But everyone was still heavily focused on the east coast. And then all of a sudden, we were at a 2% vacancy rate. Then we were at a 1% vacancy rate. We were at a 2% vacancy rate before COVID kicked in. And then COVID kicked in, and Western Australia was like sheltered from the rest of the world. We basically shut the borders. We closed the airport. We shut the borders from the east coast, and life carried on as normal in Western Australia. People in Melbourne and Sydney were locked down for months on end. So what happened at the end of COVID is a lot of people saw Perth as a safe haven because of the way we handled COVID, and people started migrating interstate from the east coast to the west coast. That gobbled up a lot of the supply again. And then there's just a lot of work right now. The government is spending billions on infrastructure projects. That's bringing more and more skilled migrants into the country. Plus, people just want to move here anyway. So there's people just moving into the country, not because of the work, but because of the lifestyle it offers. So we've gone from a 7% vacancy rate in the rental market to a 0.4% vacancy in the rental market. And to put that into perspective, the last time I checked, there was between 2 and 2,400 houses available for rent in the whole of Western Australia. And there's 2.1 million people live here.
Amazing. And what proportion of them rent?
Ooh, don't have that statistic for you, but I can find it for you.
Well, in the UK, just to give you an example, about 15 years ago, 10% of the population were in rented accommodation. Now, 20%. It's doubled in 15 years. And of course, our population has continued to grow. So the proportion of people renting now is much higher. And that is in the private rental sector. That doesn't include social housing, which is about another 20%. So, I think about 1 in 10 houses in the UK is now a rental property, the ones that are privately owned. So it's definitely growing. Now, one of the questions that I wanted to also cover, Neil, and we could go on for hours, and I'm conscious you've probably got other things to be doing with your time.
Yeah, I'm happy to chat all night about property, Wendy. No problem.
I know, when you find a sort of fellow passionate investor, it's hard, isn't it, to tear yourself away. But you spoke last week when we were chatting on your podcast about oversupply, about saturation, and that people have said to you, how on earth do you think you're going to, grow your business when, you've already got 600 units and, it's going to become saturated, the market. So what are your feelings about that when people say that to you? How do you feel about that being, an accusation? Is there any, is there any truth to that?
I don't believe so. For a long time now, we've been building the wrong sized investment properties for the rental market. And it all started back in about 2006, 2007. As houses started to get bigger, the amount of people that lived in them began to reduce. And on average now, Australia builds the biggest houses in the world at 246 square meters on average. And that generally translates into a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom house with a games room and a theatre room and a double lock-up garage on a 500 square metre block. But the problem is 80%, 75 to 80% of renters are singles or couples. So they don't want to rent 4 bedrooms with a games room and a theatre room. These are family houses. So we've been essentially supplying family homes to a rental market that is really got singles and couples that want to rent these spaces.
And presumably also it's the budget, isn't it? They don't necessarily have the budget to rent that kind of a size of a house. So there is a real mismatch between what's being built and provided and what people want and need.
Correct. Yeah, correct. So for the saturation side of things, we've got the goal for 10,000 rooms in 10 years. I don't even think that's going to scratch the surface in Western Australia at all. There is something like 35,000 people on the social housing waiting list right now for social housing. And we're not social housing. They do what they do. But I dare say we could take 20% of the people off that wait list quite easily. So there's 6,000 people. Easy.
Amazing. Now, the other thing is, sorry, just to cut across you, but I must say this before I forget, is about your disability accommodation. So this is obviously a bit of a niche within your business. What is it that you're offering there?
Yeah, so the National Disability Insurance Scheme was introduced into the Australian housing landscape by the government, by the NDIS, the National Disability Insurance Scheme. And essentially what they've realised is there's just no suitable accommodation for the people of Australia that have got disabilities. So the government realised that to deliver this style of accommodation, if they were to deliver it, it would cost them billions because it's a very unique style of accommodation. It's very hard to retrofit existing properties. So the government are really pushing and incentivising people to build new build properties. And if you can build, I'll give you the numbers on one of these properties right now. So if you can build a 2-bedroom, 2-participant bedroom dwelling with a unit on there for an on-site overnight carer, the gross rent on that for somebody with, let's say, Parkinson's or Huntington's, that's in a wheelchair, and they need full-time care, the full gross rental income on them properties is $180,000 a year. It might be $190,000, but it's up there. Now, the construction price and the land price on them, you're probably looking at $900 to $1.2 million. So the yields on these things are incredible.
Absolutely. That is amazing.
Yeah. So what we're doing with our property management business, because it's government regulated, there's obviously a lot of red tape and a lot of hoops to jump through. We are registering our property management business as a registered NDIS provider so that we can provide property management for these properties as well. And we've just hired a BDM who was actually from Luton, all the way from back of the hometown. So he's from Luton, worked a lot in the disability sector and the affordable housing sector back in the UK, and also when he's moved over here as well. So we brought him in to get in front of people with disabilities, families, care providers, government organisations, to let them know who we are, the level of accommodation that we've got coming through there as well, so that we can get people into quality housing as well.
Amazing, amazing. Neil, it's fantastic to talk to you. You're you're a bit of a sort of whirlwind, I feel. You're a very steady kind of person, but you've got this kind of a whirlwind energy about you, which is, you're going to change Western Australia for the better and bring a bit of Middlesbrough charm and practicality to boot.
Plan, Wendy, that's a plan.
So it's great. It's absolutely great to talk to you, to find out what you've been doing, to find out about your history. You're married. You've got a child, I believe, as well. Is that right?
Little Freddie. Little Freddie was born back in December 28th last year, so he's coming up to his first birthday now.
Oh, that's wonderful. Oh, that's absolutely amazing. And, I would agree with you that Australia is just a wonderful, wonderful country. And it's not perfect. No place on earth is perfect, but it's one of the closest places I've ever got to perfection. I thought it was an amazing place to visit, and we were there for a few weeks, so it was great to travel around and meet different people. And it's really good to hear from you about what's happening in the property market as well. It's very inspirational, and you're clearly on to a real thing there, making roomy houses, a new kind of cultural establishment within Western Australia. So Neil, I'd like to say a massive thank you to you for your time today, for your ability to be flexible about timings as well. We've had a bit of toing and froing about when to have the interview, but it's happened. And I know that the listeners will be really, really interested to hear what you've been doing and to stay in touch with you. So we'll put your links in the notes under the podcast, because I know there might be people who would want to get in touch with you, perhaps to find out a little bit more about what you're doing, what you offer. I believe you also offer your own education and training and mentoring as well. Is that correct?
I started doing it, Wendy, but right now my time is probably best spent. There's quite a few things going on in the background. We're speaking to a few funds at the minute, which are talking about investing some substantial amounts of money with us. So at the minute, the 3 people that I've coached so far, I've kind of stopped taking anybody else on until we get clarity on if these funds are going to come to fruition. And I think one of them might. One's actually from the UK.
Great. That's great. That's
in the UK, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, yes, there are times when you have have to say no, aren't there?
Yes.
Part of the role of the entrepreneur. We're very good at saying yes, but sometimes you have to say no. Well, that's okay. Yeah. Anybody who wants mentoring and coaching, you know where to find me. Yes, I can do it instead. But yeah, that's absolutely fine. But there might be people who are interested in investing or just exploring a bit more about the property market in Australia, or finding out a little bit more about how they could work with you and make their money go further. And it's been really a delight to have you on. Thank you so much for your time, Neil. And we look forward to seeing the Neil Gibb empire grow even further over the next year.
Thank you very much, Wendy. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the HMO Success Podcast. If you'd like to know more about how you can create a profitable HMO business, please visit our website, hmosuccess.co.uk, to find out more. We have plenty of free tools and information for you there, and also on our Facebook group, The Ultimate HMO Success System. We look forward to connecting with you very soon. Thanks for listening.